Next we have Steve Martocchio, who's going to come up and chat a little bit about all the different network systems, protections, the multi-layered approach to technology we've been talking about today, the different walls of protection, and then talk about some of the policy and security awareness training that's a huge component to an overall good security program. Steve.
Great, so first let me start a little bit about Cooperative Systems. We were founded in 1993, so we're celebrating our 25th anniversary in business. We have about 20 employees with offices in Windsor and Burlington, Mass. We're considered a managed service provider, so basically we provide outsourced security and IT services for small and medium businesses for a fixed monthly fee. We also provide virtual CIO services to help with planning, road mapping. We really want to align with our clients' business needs and be a trusted advisor. And basically everything that we talk about today are services that we provide and can help with. So, talked earlier about small businesses being at risk. There's a misconception that with a lot of small businesses that cybersecurity is an enterprise issue. That's far from the truth. Based on the 2017 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, which Jeff mentioned earlier, 61% of data breaches were businesses under 1,000 employees. Now, why are SMEs at risk? Well, there's multiple reasons. What it generally comes down to is most small businesses don't put the proper protections in place. It's due to a lot of different reasons. One, insufficient resources, whether it be human resources, financial resources, also lack of expertise. So even if you do put some of these protections in place, they may not be configured properly, they may not be monitored, alerts may not be followed up on. Regardless of the reason, organizations put themselves at huge financial, reputational, and even legal risks. We talked about some of the common threats earlier, so I won't go into too much details on this, but phishing, obviously, we've spoken about, so we know what that's all about. Huge risk for small businesses. SMEs, based on a 2017 Semantic Internet Security Threat Report, SMBs have a much higher percentage of phishing emails that come into their organization. The average is 1 out of every 3,675 messages. Companies 250 to 500 employees are the highest, so that's about 1 out of every 2,554 emails. And then companies with 1 to 250 employees are 1 out of every 2,897 messages. Ransomware, we spoke about that, CryptoLocker, WannaCry. Basically, we know what that's all about. Your data is encrypted, there's a ransom that you have to pay. These are common in small businesses. Options for this, of course, good backups and recovery, and testing recovery. If you don't have a backup, your options are to pay the ransom or forgo the data. This could cost tens of thousands of dollars, not just in cost of recovering data, but also lost productivity. Ransomware is on the rise. 2017 data hasn't come out yet, but you can see a 36% increase from 2015 to 2016. And the bottom line is there's no silver bullet for cybersecurity. It's a complex problem. It's constantly changing. It's a cat and mouse game. We're constantly up against the new threats, new ways of accessing information. We talked about the latest threats with processors. That just came out recently. For years we thought processors were fine, but now the barrier has been broken between the processor and the operating system and the data. So again, new threats are evolving constantly. So what do we do? And what we're going to talk about now is some basic and even some advanced tools and practices to put in place. I wouldn't necessarily advise this method or this either. Our approach, as Scott mentioned, we've talked today, is really a layered approach. At the core is your data or your information. And surrounded by that, you're going to have policies and procedures, tools, employee awareness. It all comes together to create a cohesive cybersecurity posture. On the endpoints, can't stress enough, we've talked about this today, patch. Not just the operating system, but third-party applications. You'll see Flash and Java and all these other browsers. All these things need to be patched. They all have vulnerabilities. So having a sound patch management platform and policy is really important. Antivirus, a lot of small businesses seem to think, well, I have antivirus, so I'm protected. That's just one tool, one layer of security. You want to make sure that it's current, you're maintaining your license, maintaining the updates. So the key is that it's up to date and managed. We recommend for all our clients a second opinion malware tool on the local machine. So you have Antivirus, our preference is WebRoot, but there's a lot of other tools out there. Our second opinion platform that we recommend is Malwarebytes. But again, there are other tools out there too. DNS filtering is another tool you can use, and basically what that does is when a website is accessed, it checks against a known list of malicious websites, and if it's on that list, it prevents the user from going to that website. And that also includes embedded links within a browser page. So if a user goes to a website and there's other links that are images or pictures that go to other websites, it's also going to block that kind of content. Our tool for that is OpenDNS or Cisco Umbrella, but again, there's others out there. Encryption, that's something that we spoke about earlier. Making sure that you have file encryption and whole disk encryption. One of the things that's important if you're in a regulated industry, if you can prove that if a laptop or a machine was lost or stolen, and you can prove that that machine was encrypted and the data is inaccessible, then the reporting requirements are a lot lighter. So you may not have to report that if the device is encrypted, and you can actually prove that. In password manager, talk about passwords being stored on sticky notes and under keyboards. There's many tools out there that you can store your passwords, make passwords complex. The advantage of having a password manager is you can make your password long, complex, have no meaning, and it's stored in the password manager, so you don't have to remember all these passwords. You just need to manage one password to get into your password vault. We recommend securing that with multi-factor authentication, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. And a lot of password managers will even provide the password into web-based applications. So if you're online, you're getting into your banking site, you can just click the link within the sign-on screen, which draws the password and user ID, which prevents keystroke loggers from being able to detect the password being provided. On the network side, lowest level of privilege. So make sure your data is controlled by who really needs access to it. So in a lot of small businesses that we've taken over as customers, we find that all of their data is accessible by all their employees. Not advisable, and something that really should be looked at. Why should someone on the shop floor of a manufacturing company have access to the accounting share? So making sure you have the right level of file protection is important. Minimizing the number of administrators on your domain. There are times where the user may have two roles. They may have administrative credentials or privileges to be able to add users, change passwords, those kinds of things. What we recommend for those users is they have a second ID they use to administer their network, and then a lower privileged account to do their daily functions with whatever their requirements are. Password policies, change policy, complexity, those are important tools also on your network. Multi-factor authentication, this helps for remote access, online cloud applications, if you have a remote desktop system where you're remoting in from home, we highly recommend multi-factor authentication. If you don't know what that is, typically you have either an app on a phone or a fob that has a randomly generated password. So not only are you using your Active Directory or standard user ID and password, but you're also using a password that changes every 30 seconds on top of that. Application level security. Again, this kind of goes along with the lowest level of privilege, but if you have the ability to enable complex or layered security within an application as far as what data people have access to, consider doing that, as well as multi-factor authentication on any applications. Strongly recommend, and as a standard, is put in a separate public and production Wi-Fi. So if you use Wi-Fi in your business, keep anything open to guests, employees. If you have a bring your own device policy and your employees are allowed to get on your network, make sure it's not on your production network. Data location. You want to know where your data is. Is it local on your server? Do you have things in the cloud? How is it protected? Is it encrypted? And backup and business continuity, I mean, everyone knows about that, but ensuring you have a good backup plan. Backups are running regularly. The platform that we deploy for our clients, we're backing up our clients' data hourly, so any changes we can roll back to the last hour. And test the backups. Ensure you can recover the data, your business continuity plan, what happens if your building catches fire. Do you have the ability to spin up in the cloud? What is the plan? And VLANing is important. So VLANing comes into play when you're talking about segregating machines. So some organizations will put very sensitive machines on their own network. So VLANing is basically separating your network into multiple segments, and then you can secure between segments. What we recommend, one, if there's highly sensitive data, segment that off. But even more importantly than that, if you have a third-party vendor that is providing a system for them to manage their, like an HVAC vendor. So we all know about the Target breach that happened several years ago. That was because an HVAC vendor had a machine on Target's production network. It wasn't patched, it wasn't managed. It became, the machine was breached, and once hackers were in, they were able to go east and west on the network and detect and find sensitive information. So if that machine was segmented on its own network, then even if the machine became compromised, the production data wouldn't be at risk. Perimeter, everyone's familiar with firewalls, but what we find a lot of times when we go into a small business is they're out at Best Buy or Staples buying a low-end consumer-grade firewall. We recommend a business-class firewall that includes the ability to do intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. It's going to watch for malicious activity and stop that and protect the network. Content filtering is important. You want to make sure that your employees aren't going to websites or doing things that are have an adverse impact on the business, whether it be their productivity or put the business at risk because of threats. DNS filtering, I mentioned this on the desktop side and the endpoint side, but you can also enable this at the network side. So any device that connects to your network is going to be filtered, even if you don't have the agent locally. That data those requests to the internet will be filtered for malicious websites. We also recommend vulnerability testing and penetration testing. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but they're actually pretty different. Vulnerability testing is a tool that scans against your external IPs and will come back with known vulnerabilities, known risks, known patches that should be applied to that device. For a penetration test, someone is actively trying to get in and breach those vulnerabilities. So there are two different things used interchangeably. We recommend that both be performed against your environment to ensure, from the internet perspective, from the outside looking in, you're protected. Some additional and advanced security tools and measures. Radius. What Radius does is it locks down the connectivity on your switch, which is a device that all your machines connect to. You could be required to have specific things like antivirus. It needs to be part of the domain. You can set specific rules so that if someone comes into your environment, just plugs in a machine, if it doesn't meet specific criteria, it's not allowed access to the production network. It may have access to the internet, just depends on the rules that you apply, but it basically protects you from that rogue person walking in and just connecting to your network. Mobile device management, encryption on device. What happens if a device is lost or stolen? Do you have the ability to wipe that device? Those are important measures. SIM monitoring. That's used for event monitoring on your firewall and on your servers. And what that does is that'll take events that are occurring from one or from multiple devices for that matter, and then correlate them together. So maybe you have an action that's happening on the firewall, which doesn't look suspicious, but there's something else going on in your domain control or something else going on in this machine, and when you put them all together, it's a threat. So what SIM will do is that'll correlate all the data and collect the events and information that's happening on multiple machines and kind of put them together to put the pieces of the puzzle together and show a big picture. Data loss prevention, that is used for, it's a tool that you define your data and you're protecting what gets sent out. So it goes along with access control, but it takes it one step further. It will audit on someone who shouldn't have access to data, who may have gained access, and then they try to email that file out. Those kinds of alerts will be triggered. So it goes beyond just looking for your administrative levels and access levels, and it's actually auditing what's happening with the files, where the files are going, who's accessed them. Dark web scanning, that came up earlier. One of the tools that we're introducing to our clients is the ability to scan out to the dark web against their domain and come back with any breach credentials. It'll show the user ID. It'll show a hashed password, so you can it'll show the first several characters and the rest is hashed, so you can go to the user and say, does this look like your password? So what that will do is, one, promote good habits, two, show you what's available and what's out in the dark web for you, and the action after you find a breach like that is any site that you're using that password on. Make sure you change. Too often people use the same password on multiple websites, which becomes a challenge. As I mentioned, a password manager or password vault will help with that because you're not typing that password in all the time, so you don't need to remember it. But that's an important tool to know what's out on the internet, where your vulnerabilities are, and being able to mitigate that. And internal penetration testing. So we talked a little bit about external. There's also internal testing where you can test your applications, test the systems from the inside, and look for potential vulnerabilities that a rogue employee or even someone that comes in and just connects to your network. It'll look for holes in internal security too. So how do you prepare? Risk management plan. Know what data you have. What would a hacker want? So kind of put on the hacker hat, so to speak, and say, what data do I have? What PII do I have? Personally, thank you. My tongue's getting tied here. So knowing what data you have, putting controls in place, and then going back and checking your risk management plan regularly to make sure that your controls are effective. Are there new controls that you can put in place? There may be a risk that you decided was a risk of doing business, and we know that this is a risk, but we're not going to take action on this because of X, Y, and Z. Either it's low risk or cost prohibitive, whatever the case may be. You should be going back to that regularly to ensure are there new tools available? Is this still a risk? Has the risk become an even greater risk where we need to take action on it? So constantly, at least annually, looking at your risk management plan. Policies, acceptable use, letting your employees know, okay, this is how we expect you to use the systems. As long as employees know, then you can enforce these policies. Just setting those expectations up front. Written information security policy, you mentioned WISP. That's just as important. How do you secure your data? What tools do you have in place? Again, ensuring that you're revisiting all these security policies regularly is key. Your incident response plan, how do you respond when there is a breach? BYOD policy. So are you allowing your employees to bring their own mobile phones, tablets, and are you allowing them to connect to your production network? Are you allowing them to put email on there? Are you allowing them to use third-party applications? You should have a policy set up to say, okay, this is, if you're accessing our data, here are the rules that you have to comply with to bring your own device. For example, in our BYOD policy, a phone can't be cracked or rooted, and any applications that an employee puts on their mobile device has to come from a trusted source. So those are the kinds of things that you're going to want to keep an eye out for. We talked about controls, both physically and physical controls, as well as network controls. Talked about cyber liability insurance, and Scott mentioned employee awareness training. There are a lot of tools out there for employee awareness training. Phish testing is typically part of that. We use a platform called KnowBefore, and what that does is it starts out with a baseline. So we send an email out, or multiple emails actually, which are phishing emails. I have an example of one here. Looks legitimate, but there's definitely red flags that would indicate that it's a phishing email. So we'll test your employees and kind of get a baseline of their vulnerability level, and from there, continual training, online computer-based training, continual phishing. One thing that our platform does is if a user clicks on a phishing email that came from our system, it's going to come up with a screen like this and say, okay, here are the red flags. This is what you should have caught. So by constantly creating an environment of security awareness and a culture of being on your toes and what to watch for, and keeping this in front, instead of just doing an annual training, there should be an ongoing program that constantly puts cybersecurity front and center for all your employees. We mentioned our cybersecurity poster. Grab one on your way out. We have them up here. Put them in your break room. Put it in front of people. It's that constant reminder. So part of what we do at Cooperative Systems, when we take on a new client or a new prospect, we do an assessment. And basically, it's three-pronged. One is a technology assessment. It's the standard stuff in a technology assessment. Your workstations, your servers, applications, network devices. But then we'll also go into a security assessment, which we'll talk about. Okay, what's the status of your patching, Active Directory, auditing who has access to what files, who has administrative controls. Those, again, these are all things that I mentioned. Thorough audit will give you that information. We'll also perform an external vulnerability scan, a dark web scan, and give you a phish test as part of that. And then on top of that, we do a business assessment where we get into your IT operational maturity level. Basically, we'll talk about standards on the operational side, use of clouds, compliance with security and compliance requirements, governance. We'll talk about budgeting, technology involvement when creating or bringing on new businesses or services that you want to offer, and then strategic alignment with business. So again, training, vendor management. These are all things that are key to your security posture, your overall IT posture, and the productivity of your staff. So if you're interested and you want to sign up today, we're offering a 25% discount. And you can see myself, Scott, Megan, or Bob in the back. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. So, as you guys probably can imagine, as you've seen today, there's just so many components to what we've talked about. So many things to think about, so many things to do your due diligence on, so many things to spend time on, evaluating, cost factors. But the news that we want to deliver today is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, is there are actionable and affordable ways to do that for small businesses. And as Steve mentioned, our initial assessment is one of the things that we do where we take that into mind and evaluate your business and go through all the different components, not just the technology, but what are your policies and procedures, what are the protections you have in place, how do you use technology in your business to ensure that use of technology is aligned with the goals of the business, and if there's any growth plans of the business, do they align that way? And all those different layers of protection are built into that assessment, and then as well ongoing. We have a lot of trusted business partners who are here today who help round out all the different components that make up the whole program. The guys at Cyberstone, for example, do our penetration testing and vulnerability scanning for us, because it's almost a conflict of interest for us to provide those services to our clients, because when you're doing a penetration test or a vulnerability scan, you want to make sure that the system's being patched and maintained and secured well, and that's our job for our clients. So we purposely partner with organizations to do that for us, for our clients. So again, there's certainly very affordable and actionable ways to do this in the small business world. So that was really the message we wanted to send today. Any questions from the room before I get into some of the ones that have been written down already? Yes?
I have one question. In diving just a little bit deeper into the road warrior, the mobile devices today, I know that's probably the biggest risk for a lot of small businesses. And you talked a little bit about, doing Wi-Fi separate, things like that. How can you penetrate those devices? I mean, is there a process to do that? Because those are so, something's connected. Those are so volatile, because they could be there a half a day, a full day. How do you protect from that?
Steve, would jump in?
Yeah, I'll take that. So if you look at, and I'm looking at you because of healthcare, if you look at some of the worst fines ever levied against businesses in history, multi-million-dollar fines, in HIPAA they call that willful negligence. You knew about the risk, you didn't do anything about it, you got hit, didn't do anything about it, and it happened again. And that's the category of willful negligence. In other words, unacceptable, right? And a lot of those fines are from simple things like not encrypting a laptop that travels. So I've got my laptop here, I've got whole disk encryption on it, so if somebody was trying to rip the hard drive out of that, it's useless to them. It's in a shell of encryption. And then file level encryption, I think several of us mentioned. So even if it's up and running, and whether it's at the business or at home, if somebody tries to steal a file off of it, that file's useless to them. It's encrypted, and it's only visible or viewable on that system. So that's my personal thing. I use YubiKey. It's a little multi-factor. You mentioned the word token. So I use Gmail, right? And when I go into Gmail, I've got to put in my password, and I use LastPass to do it. I don't even know what my password is. 16 digits of nonsense, right? But LastPass fills it out, and then Gmail says, go ahead and put in your hardware token, and I insert that into my laptop, and again, it rotates digits and stuff. And only after I do that can I get in. So wherever I am, I'm safe. I don't really care if I'm on some public Wi-Fi. Gmail is encrypted, and I'm using multi-factor authentication, so I'm not stressed out in an airport.
And one of the things you had asked about, the wireless, people bringing devices in, and then road warriors, you said about working on the road. Our approach to that and our standard to that is that any business who uses Wi-Fi in a production manner has to have two different wireless networks. So they can be available and managed on the same set of hardware, but they have to be, Steve spoke about VLANs, so they have to be on separate dispersed networks so that they can't talk. So only your protected, your encrypted, your managed, your patched devices, your company-approved devices can exist on the wireless production network. Those are the only devices that are allowed to connect to that wireless production network. Any other device, if it's my personal mobile phone, if it's my tablet, if it's my personal laptop, those devices can only connect to the public Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi that you would have available within your facility. So that's our approach to people who have a lot of the devices that are on the road, back in the office. That only those company-approved devices that you have all those protocols and protections in place on, and that you're monitoring them, all those things are doing, can exist on there.
And generally, the Android mobile devices tend to be a little more at risk than the Apple devices. I'd recommend Antivirus on your mobile device too. There's several tools out there. Sophos has a free antivirus, and there are a couple others too. But yeah, antivirus on even the handheld devices. Yeah, is key.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it did, thank you.
Great.
So I have a question. So what do you tell a small dental practice or, a small garage? How do those types of places secure their information? What can they do? Because they don't have the resources. They may not even have much of an inclination, and you certainly don't have the dollars.
It's an educational thing, right? So you have to measure risk. You have to measure your risk as an organization, and what can you afford to spend to mitigate some of that risk. What other insurance protections can you put in as well? And there's obviously a cost benefit, cost value of doing that. The challenge, again, historically has been, and the perception has been, that small businesses don't have the funding available to do these things, to have these types of protections in place. And the reality is that if you look at the cost of a breach, the cost of data loss, the cost of reputation, the revenue loss during the incident, it's much outweighs the cost of putting the protections in place. So we have these discussions quite frequently with clients who have never had a program in place before. And part of what we do is work with them to develop. You don't have to do it all day long. You can have a goal of getting to a point where you feel the business is protected well, and there's steps to take along the way, and procedures to put in place along the way. But it's also measuring what are the risks. So to the point of assessing upfront and measuring where are your biggest points of risk and how can we close those gaps, and come up with a plan to do it in an affordable way. Any other questions before? And these may spawn some other questions, but any other? This one looks like it's probably for Matt. What do the regulation fines look like if you're not following compliance rules? What are punishments?
So I guess it depends upon, we talked about, different levels of screw ups, right? First time you're sort of giving best efforts, doing what you're supposed to be doing, as opposed to, you have vulnerability, you ignore that vulnerability, you get hit, and then you ignore it again and you get hit a second time, right? So that's going to vary in terms of how the regulators, to the extent that you're in a regulated industry, or to the extent that you're not, just sort of the applicable state law is going to treat you, right? So all over the map, but as bad as personal liability, individual liability, piercing sort of the corporate veil and targeting the individuals within a particular company if they were, willful in that instance, right? So talk about that sort of sense of obligation and responsibility, in light of the cost-benefit analysis. There's some real exposure here. Millions of dollars for large organizations, comparatively hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars for smaller organizations. So it really depends upon circumstance, but the risk and exposure is real in all circumstances.
I can add just that there is, in healthcare, which is my frame of reference, there's something called the wall of shame that the government actually has out there. You can look there and see that it runs into the millions and willful neglect, forget it, multi-millions. So that's accessible to anyone. If you're wondering if your healthcare provider has been just fined for neglect or anything, it's out there, it's available to you, and it's not pretty. It's the wall of shame. .gov.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's a government website. They put it out there and they post all of the fines and what they were for, and you can find
Good to know.
everything. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Yes.
Yes, Scott, I just wanted to add to her point in the insurance space, whether it's property casualty, life and annuity, health. New York has their very rigid regulation, DYDFS, the Department of Financial Services. We didn't touch upon it, but back to what can really happen to you. If you're not in compliance, they technically can take away your license to do business in New York. So at the end of the day, if you got a book of business, that's at risk. And I think what makes it really, the meat on the bones, not because New York itself is a pretty large market, but I've basically spoken to some smaller companies that say, well, I don't do business in New York, so I'm not touched. Well, the short story is the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, is using the New York regulation as a template. So my suggestion is in the next 18 to 24 months, you're going to see, if not all, the vast majority of the other 49 states following New York. So short story, if you don't follow the rules, you're out of business.
I want to add one more thing to your slide showed NIST SP 171. So small manufacturers have to be compliant. People who make, you guys are familiar with Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. They do all the design work and things like that, and blueprints. And it's smaller manufacturers who are making the coatings and the gears and the parts that they then use to make their planes and the ships that defend our country and things like that. And you talk about losing your license to do insurance or banking or whatever. These guys will lose their DoD contracts if they're not in compliance. The compliance date for that particular one was December 31st. So we're already 2 months past it. And now the business owner has to make a decision. What's my annual revenue due to this DoD contract versus the cost of compliance? And which one do I want to do?
Yeah, good point. Kind of going along the lines of the insurance discussion, this one is, how much cyber insurance should I purchase?
So it's a question I get a lot. And the way that a cyber policy responds is it pays for notification, credit monitoring, forensics, fines and regulations that you get hit with, your attorney fees, public relations, call center setup, and then the two outliers would be extortion and ransomware. So that's the way that a policy responds. You can see how those fees can add up very quickly. But one policy doesn't fit all. And that's why it's really critical to take a look at what data, how much data am I holding on to, and then using that information to calculate what your limit should be. If you're holding on to personal identifiable information, the point of the two, the average file breach costs about $120 per record, versus the healthcare is at $320. So if you have a lot of healthcare information, you're going to need a much larger limit than somebody that's holding on to personal identifiable information. So it's really just taking a look at the quantity and the type of data, and then calculating your limit from there.
Do all of them have that donut hole, or is that a choice?
What do you mean the difference?
So, let's call it your deductible, massive deductible.
Yep, so deductible is controllable. You can usually choose your deductible. Typical is 5,000 to 10,000.
Okay, so I'm looking, we're a slightly bigger organization, so looking at
Yeah.
something like 75,000.
Yep.
And up.
And it's controlling your costs at that point too. So the higher the risk or the amount of risk that you're going to take, which is the retention or the deductible, is going to control your cost of the policy.
And now are you putting in requirements in order to people to collect on it? These are the things that you need to have in place?
Oddly enough, you would think so. But with most policies, you go through the application process, they're going to determine what controls you currently have in place, and then they rate or give credits accordingly. But when you get into a cyber application, most people think, well, I'm giving it to my IT guy to fill it out. Probably only about 10% of it is actually IT related. The rest of it's going to be policies and procedures.
Thank you. Matt, you talked a lot about vendor agreements and what to look for and due diligence within your vendor agreements. This question says, is any tips on seeking out specific landmines within your vendor agreements? Specific things to look for.
So we talked about indemnification, we talked about limitation liability. I think the other thing that we tend to see a lot is to the extent that you are turning over your data to a vendor, and then at contract termination or expiration, what needs to happen in order for you to get your data back? So do you need that vendor to do something, to perform some service, in order to transition your data that that vendor is holding to you or to your new vendor, probably your new vendor, right? So we call these deconversion services. So oftentimes, to the extent that that service requires deconversion services, a vendor will say, at the expiration of the agreement, you agree to pay our then current deconversion fees, right? So what does that mean? Right? What do then current deconversion services mean at the expiration of an agreement 5 years from now? Well, there are companies out there that in lean times will make their deconversion services a profit center, right? And if you give them sort of that arbitrary discretion over what their then current fees are, you're going to find out what their then current fees. And we happen to deal in a space with financial technology vendors where literally we're dealing with public companies that report out in their SEC filings what they're making off of deconversion fees. Their investors look to see what they're making, and in every single agreement that they present, some of these agreements are 150 pages long, it says you will pay our then current deconversion services, right? So ask yourselves, with your vendors, what do you need at the expiration of the agreement? It's great, we're starting out on this relationship, but at some point it's probably going to end. Then what? What needs to happen? And is there a cost associated with it? If there is a cost associated with it, how much? Put it in the contract. Tell me exactly how much. So again, we talked about that little conflict friction up front. There won't be conflict friction on the back end if you ask that question up front. There will be if they hit you with a bill that's completely shocking, which happens frequently.
Thank you. Jeff, this looks like it's a good question for you. Is it really that important to protect all info? What's the value of simple stuff like email addresses?
Again, we mentioned earlier, when we do penetration testing, we scrape data off of publicly available websites. So we'll go through and literally scrape any little piece of information we can find from the website, and oftentimes those convert to usernames at the first part of the email address. And we use that, and then along with dictionary attacks and things like that. So I don't care what the data is, it's still important. And people tell me all the time, well, I'm not regulated, so it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. If you're, if you're making widgets, and your employee, you have 200 employees making widgets and they can't make widgets, well, you're paying them to do nothing, right? So in manufacturing, every minute is expensive. But the data is important, right? And whether or not you're paying employees and they can't get work done, or you're facing some kind of compliance need.
Thank you. Any other questions from the group? All right. I want to thank everybody for coming today. We're going to, as Megan mentioned before, we're going to circulate all of the content from today's presentations to the group. Any follow-up questions you may have, certainly reach out to us, and we'll certainly get those questions answered. I want to thank all of our partners for being here today. Great presentations, great content. I think hopefully it's been of value to everybody in the room.